All right, you may be seated. Let the record reflect all 15 jurors have returned to the courtroom. Commonwealth may proceed with your closing argument.
Thank you, Judge. Please support counsel. Alex Johnson's family, friends, Ms. Williams. Good morning. Good morning. We've been at this now for several days, and this is probably the most important day for the Johnson family. Because this is finally the day that what happened to their son back in December of 2013 finally comes full circle. And there's some measure of justice for them, some ending to what has been an incredible and unbelievable nightmare. On behalf of the Commonwealth, and when I say the Commonwealth, I mean the people of the Commonwealth, because that's who Andrea and I represent. We represent the people of the Commonwealth, people out in this audience, people that have watched about this case on television, read about it in the paper, people that loved Alex, his family, the people of the Commonwealth. That's who we represent. So on behalf of the Commonwealth, we thank you for the attention that you've given in this trial, for the notes that you've taken, and for what we know are going to be your thoughtful deliberations when you go back in there and decide whether or not Robert Markham Taylor is guilty, as he was indicted by the grand jury, of murder, kidnapping, and tampering with physical evidence. Now for the next, I gotta say, it's going to be probably an hour and a half. Don't look at your clocks, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about in this case. We're going to talk about the evidence. I'm going to play some videos. I'm going to play some of the testimony, and I'm doing that because that is the evidence in this case. I do not apologize for showing you the video of the brutal assault, for showing you the pictures of Alex after he was murdered, for playing some witness testimony, because that's what this case is about. Witness testimony, not what I say that it was, but what you heard and what you're about to see that it was. Before I do that, there's two other things I want to talk to you about. And the first one is these instructions. Okay, and when we get through them, I'll tell you which pages to refer to, and I may read from some of them. But the instructions are the law. Okay, the judge has heard all of the evidence in the case, and based on the evidence he's heard, he's given you these instructions. And what you do is you take the facts, which are the testimony and the evidence in this case, and you apply it and see where does it fit in these instructions. These instructions tell you what we, Ms. Williams and I, have to prove to you in order for you to convict the defendant of murder, kidnapping, and tampering with physical evidence. There are 3 instructions in here on murder, and I want to just take a moment to explain the difference in each of them to you. So go ahead and turn to instruction number 3. Murder. This is intentional murder. Up top, under B1, and under B2, it's wanton murder. So you see, there's 2 types of murder in Kentucky based on the state of mind of the actor. Okay, and when I say state of mind, I'm not talking about whether he was upset or angry. I'm talking about his mental state at the time he committed the offense. And to be in murder in Kentucky means you either intentionally cause the death of another person or you wantonly cause the death of another person. And that's what that instruction is. If you believe that Robert Markham Taylor intentionally killed Alex, then it's intentional murder. If you believe that he wantonly killed Alex under circumstances manifesting extreme indifference to the value of human life, it's wanton murder. There's just two different ways to commit murder in Kentucky. And your instructions lay out, if you flip back to number 2, definitions, what intentional means and what wanton means. And intentional means it's your conscious objective to cause the result, meaning you intended to kill Alex, or it's your conscious objective to engage in the conduct. Stabbing someone with an instrument 20 plus times would be evidence of intent. And the instruction for wantonly is on there. A person acts wantonly with respect to a result or a circumstance when he is aware of and consciously disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk that the result will occur or the circumstance exists. Not intentional, one. So 2 ways to commit murder in instruction number 3. The next instruction, number 4, is also murder. And what this instruction tells us, if you believe Timothy Ballard was the one that caused his death and he was assisted by Robert Markham Taylor, and that Markham intended that Alex would die, then he's still guilty of murder. If he participated in this and intended that Alex should die, he's still guilty of murder. That's complicity to murder. And then the third instruction, which is instruction number 5, if you can't decide whether Robert Markham Taylor was the principal, meaning the main guy, or the accomplice, it doesn't matter. Because this instruction says you will find him guilty of murder under this instruction, either as principal or as accomplice. Now there are other homicide instructions in here, and that would be number 6, manslaughter in the first degree, and number 7. Manslaughter in the first degree happens in 2 ways. By intentionally causing someone's death when you are acting under an extreme emotional disturbance. An extreme emotional disturbance is in your definitions. Don't flip to it right now because it's long and I'm just going to explain it to you. An extreme emotional disturbance is when a person is acting in response to a circumstance that causes them to become out of control. Probably the best example of that is the old heat of passion that we used to talk about, where one person comes home to find their spouse in the arms of another and flips out, pulls the gun out of the nightstand, and shoots them both. They were acting uncontrollably to a circumstance, and their response was reasonable under the circumstance. There is nothing like that in this case. Nothing. This case is murder. It's not manslaughter in the first degree. The next homicide instruction is manslaughter in the second degree. Number 7. Manslaughter in the second degree is wantonly causing the death. Not intentional, but wantonly causing the death. There is no doubt that Robert Markham Taylor intended to kill Alex. It's not wanton. And if it is wanton, he certainly manifested extreme indifference to the value of human life with his conduct. And that's the difference between wanton murder and manslaughter in the second degree. So it's not manslaughter in the second degree. There is a defense in these instructions, and that's number 8, and that's intoxication. If a person is so impaired, so out of it, that they don't know what they're doing, the law says we're not going to hold them responsible for their conduct. The only evidence you have that Robert Markham Taylor was out of it comes out of his own mouth. When he says, I was on cocaine, I was on marijuana, I was on ecstasy, which is Molly. But all of his conduct, what he did after the killing, what he did at the club, his phone calls, his text messages, his cleaning up, demonstrate to us he was not out of it at all. In fact, his conduct was very deliberate and very intentional. So intoxication doesn't apply in this case. The remaining instructions are kidnapping and tampering with physical evidence, and those are fairly self-explanatory, and I'm not going to talk about it. Now, what's not in there, and Ms. Downs is right, I'm going to remind you of this, what is not in there is that the Commonwealth must prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt why Robert Markham Taylor killed Alex. It's not an element of murder, proving why something happened. And you understand why? Why is not an element? Because we're never going to know. We are never going to know why Taylor did what he did. The fact is that he did it. And even if we knew, even if we could crawl inside his head and understand why he did it, it would make 0 sense to us. None. So what you're asked to do is to look at his conduct. And if it's been proved to you beyond a reasonable doubt, like it has, then you shall find him guilty of murder. So that's the instructions. The other thing to talk about before we talk about the evidence is your job as jurors. You're well on your way to completing your job as jurors by coming in every day, by sitting and listening to the evidence. But now you have to deliberate. And deliberation is a little bit different than just listening. Deliberation means that you go back there together, 12 of you, because 3 of you are going to get pulled off here in a few minutes as alternates, and you won't deliberate. So for the 3 of you, and we don't know who it is yet, that are the alternates, thank you. I'm sorry you're not going to be back there and see this thing through, but thank you. And when you go back there to deliberate, you're going to talk to one another, and you're going to listen to one another. You're going to see what one another thinks of the evidence, and then you're going to come to a collective decision, because your verdict has to be unanimous. And maybe you think, how do I get from here to there in a verdict? What gives me the skills to judge? And I would say that you all have all the skills that you need to judge. You're adults, you're professionals, you come from different walks of life. You have children, you have spouses, you have parents. You have some understanding of human behavior, why people do what they do, right? That makes you the perfect juror. So when you go back there and you start to look at all the evidence, look at each individual piece of evidence, but then also look at all of the evidence collectively. Because that's what we're trying to do here. Put it all together into one big picture so that you can understand what happened on the morning of December 20th or on the evening of December 20th into the morning of the 21st. And know beyond a reasonable doubt that Robert Markham Taylor is guilty. There's a saying, and you all know it, a picture paints 1,000 words. And if a picture paints 1,000 words, what does a video paint? And if you take a video of a murder, which is what we have in this case, and you corroborate what you see in that video with other videos, and you corroborate it with eyewitness testimony like Sarah Connor, with eyewitness testimony like Harley Dambrowski, with the corroborated actions of a defendant, with evidence that he concealed and removed blood, that he jumped a car, that he made statements to others, you don't want to know what happened, it wasn't supposed to go down that way. And the physical evidence on the body of Alex, what the video paints is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You don't have to rely on Tim Ballard for one thing in this case. Not one thing. You can look at the video, you can look at the eyewitness testimony, you can look at the photographs, you can listen to what everyone had to say, and believe beyond a reasonable doubt that Robert Markham Taylor is guilty. Alex Johnson. Going to be 33 years old on his next birthday. Transylvania graduate, chef at the Boone Center at University of Kentucky. Sound like a nice guy. Son of Judy and Lee Johnson. Brother Casey, that's family and friends here today, who loved him. Lisa's boyfriend. And tragically and sadly for Alex, because in the end it would kill him, friend of Robert Markham Taylor and business associate of Robert Markham Taylor, the business, large quantities of marijuana. What do we know about Alex's lifestyle? Well, you saw the pictures of his apartment. Quiet, modest, nothing flashy about it. He had metal furniture, a little bit of things in the apartment, but not a lot of things. His mode of transportation, bicycles mostly. His clothes, not very dressy, not very flashy. Wore a ball hat, wore a long beard. Very different than Robert Markham Taylor. Robert Markham Taylor, what do we know about his lifestyle? He is flashy. He is about the image. He is about the way that it looks. There he is, walking into trust hours after killing Alex. Dressed up, dapper, ready to party, ready to have a good time. And always in control. Always in control of every situation. He was in control of Ballard. Ballard was his employee. He told you about himself. Mr. Taylor told you about himself. He is an accomplished fisherman. He's an artist. He makes things out of glass, and in his words, they're really cool things. He is a guy who has a barber chair in his garage so that every 2 weeks he can get a fresh cut and fade because that's how he wears his hair. Why am I telling you all this stuff about him? Because it tells you a lot about what's inside the man. I don't doubt that people want to get good haircuts. It's good. People should look nice. I mean, this is part of life. People should dress nice, right? It's okay to be an artist. It's okay to be a good fisherman. But it tells us something about this man, that he was in control, that his image was everything to him, and it's no different for that night that he killed Alex. That he is in control, and he is about the image. He referred to Ballard and others as the hired hands that would keep the gate. He referred to Ballard and the taxi cab drivers as the drivers who would service him and his friends. He clearly knew what his station in life is and what people like Timothy Ballard's station in life is. And what did Ballard have to say about Taylor? Just in general, what did he have to say about Taylor? That Mr. Taylor, as he referred to him, Mr. Taylor was very outgoing, that he was always buying drinks for everybody, that Mr. Taylor had a lot of respectable friends around him. Important people. That's how Mr. Ballard referred to Mr. Taylor. So this is one of those times when it's really important for you to use this skill as a juror to think about human behavior and look at the dynamic of the relationship between Robert Markham Taylor and Timothy Ballard, because there is clearly a dynamic there that is remarkable between Ballard and Taylor. I hope you caught a little bit of it during Ballard's testimony. He referred to the defendant as Mr. Taylor throughout. He never called him Mark. He never called him anything other than Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor this and Mr. Taylor that. Because even now, Ballard knows his station in life. He's tiny. He's Tim Ballard, and that's Mr. Taylor. He was Robert Markham Taylor's employee. He was not his friend. He was never his equal. And in fact, it was more like prince and servant between Ballard and Taylor. In this relationship, Robert Markham Taylor was the alpha dog. Always, and especially on the night that he killed Alex. It was Taylor who devised the plan to kill Alex. It was Taylor who put the plan into motion. It was Taylor who had Ballard there to help and to be the heavy lifter. And now it's Taylor trying to make Ballard the fall guy. Because Ballard is big and mean looking and a convicted felon. Perfect fall guy. Because who wouldn't believe this over Timothy Ballard? The guy in the nice suit. He wants to be in control, and don't you let him do it. Don't you let him do it. Because all of the evidence in this case is to the contrary. All of the evidence in this case is to the contrary and shows that Robert Markham Taylor killed Alex Johnson, not Timothy Ballard. Taylor and Ballard met in the fall of 2013. Ballard was a security person, or a bouncer, as they call it at Riptides. Taylor was a bartender. And in October of that year, when Ballard no longer had a job, Taylor hired him to drive his friends around at night, because he's a responsible partier. He doesn't drive intoxicated or impaired or anything else, and so he gets Ballard to drive him and his friends home at the end of the evening. And according to Ballard, it turned into more than that. It wasn't just the weekends. Later, it was all the time. In fact, Ballard drove the Mercedes home, to his own home in the evening, so he could be available to pick up Taylor whenever Taylor needed to be picked up, to take Taylor places that he needed to go, and to drop off packages or deliveries that Taylor needed to make, meaning drugs. That was his job. Now, in keeping with that dynamic, Taylor had Ballard do something for him when it got to be the time that Alex was to be killed, and that was to get a barrel. or excuse me, to get a truck, right? To get a truck from his friend, and for that truck to be there on the night, but Alex was going to be killed. Taylor, for his part, got a barrel. Got a barrel from Bill Reynolds, who has since passed away. And the witness that you heard from was a man by the name of John Kennedy. John Kennedy provided the barrel that ultimately ended up at Robert Markham Taylor's garage, a barrel that came pristine and without any holes in it, but somehow, on the morning that Alex is brought back into the garage, that barrel has holes in it and the top is cut.
And in what condition would the barrels be in when you got them?
Nearly no.
So would they have holes punched in them?
No, ma'am.
Would they have the top cut open?
No, ma'am.
And how big were these blue barrels?
55 gallon.
And what material were they made out of?
Steel.
And in what condition would the barrels be in when you got them?
Near.
And when you would get the barrels, it would not have these holes in it, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm showing you it's been previously marked as Commonwealth's Exhibit 55. Did you ever receive a barrel in that condition with the top cut open?
No, ma'am, I did not.
Okay. Now, Mr. Kennedy, do you remember talking to a gentleman named Bill Reynolds in
Yes.
December of 2013?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, Mr. Reynolds has passed away, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And after you had a conversation with Mr. Reynolds, did you give him one of these blue barrels?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
So Taylor gets a barrel, okay? Good shape. This is how it appears, though, that night that Alex's body gets put inside. And as you might expect, Taylor has an explanation for it. That he got this barrel for the purpose of burning trash, that he was the one that punched holes in it, that he was the one that cut the top off and peeled it back. Because Taylor always has an explanation for what happens. Next, Taylor asked Ballard to get the truck. Ballard, even though it would appear that Taylor had access to a truck at the garage, you saw that when you saw the video of Quinshire Court on January 20th. Ballard obliged him and got a truck from a man whom he'd borrowed a truck from before. Ballard borrowed the truck from John Johns the day before the murder. Ballard drove with Taylor out to John Johns so they could pick up the truck, and Ballard drove it back into town.
And when you... And while you were in Florida, did you receive a telephone call from Timothy Ballard?
I did. He called me on the 19th of December. We were already there and wanted to know if he could borrow the truck to deliver furniture for his sister.
Of course, Taylor has another explanation for that. He says Ballard just borrowed the truck to deliver furniture. But coincidentally, again, just like a barrel that shows up in the garage the day before a murder, a truck shows up in the garage the day before the murder, the truck that's used to take the body down to the river. Again, Taylor has an explanation for it, because he's got an explanation for everything. And Taylor made plans to go with Alex to Trust on that Friday night. Made those plans earlier in the week. Lisa told you about that. That she was on the phone talking to Alex, that the defendant came to the door, that he knocked, that Alex says there's a knock on the door, hey babe, Mark is here. And she knew that he was going to trust that night because they talked about it earlier in the week.
And
Alex told me that Mark was at his house and that he was going to get going. And I had known from my conversations earlier in the week and during that time that we had spoke that evening that he had plans with Mark to go out that night to someplace called Trust.
So it's just a coincidence then, like it is with the barrel, like it is with the truck, that the night that Alex gets killed, this defendant makes plans to be with him at Trust. Now, in the evening of December 20th, the two of them arrive separately at the garage at Quinshire Court. Taylor pulls in his Mercedes, Ballard pulls in the truck. Ballard pulls into the fourth bay, the one at the far end, pulls the truck in there. Taylor pulls his Mercedes into the third bay.
Alex.
Taylor in the dark going inside to open the door for Ballard to come in the truck that he's borrowed. They get inside. Who knows what they do? According to Ballard, they play chess. They do that a lot to settle their nerves, I guess. And then a client comes by. Ballard has a client, or Taylor has a client come by to buy some marijuana. That would be Carly Dembrowski. She arrived to purchase marijuana or shake, as she had called it in her text message. And you'll remember how she described Timothy Ballard in the garage. She knew who he was, although she really didn't know him. He was the big guy. He was wearing a baseball cap. And how did she describe the defendant? She described him as being rushed, not like he normally is, not making eye contact like he normally does, and acting suspiciously.
And did you go to his garage on December the 20th?
Yes.
And how did you get over there?
In my car.
And what kind of car was it?
A white Camry.
And did it have a sunroof?
Yes.
Now, how did you initially contact him?
I texted him.
I'm reading 4913, where it said, is that your phone number?
Yes.
Okay, and what did you say when you texted him?
That we wanted shake.
And what does that mean, that you want shake?
It's just a word for marijuana.
Was Timothy Ballard there?
Yes.
Did you speak to him that night?
No.
And do you remember what Mr. Ballard was wearing?
No, I just remember that he had a hat on.
And when you say hat, what kind of hat?
Like a trucker baseball cap kind of hat.
And how much marijuana did you buy on that night?
An ounce, I believe.
And how much did you pay?
$100.
And was the defendant acting normally that night?
No, he was really rushed. He's normally really talkative. He wasn't very talkative. He wasn't really like making eye contact or anything like that. He was acting suspiciously.
She told you that she paid $100 for an ounce of marijuana, and then she later called him back because when she got back to her place and waited, she realized that he had shorted her that night. So this sticks out to her. After Carly leaves and pulls out in her white Camry with the sunroof, the defendant comes out with Timothy Ballard. And you saw from that video, and I'm going to show you here again, how each of them were dressed. Taylor was dark. He's the smaller of the men. He had a dark top on and dark pants on. Ballard is a big guy. He has a dark shirt on and white pants on in the video. And although it's very hard to tell, when he turns his head to the side, you can see that Timothy Ballard is wearing a baseball cap. So Carly pulls away. That's Ballard walking across, around to the back passenger door to open it for Mr. Taylor. So Mr. Taylor can get into the back seat where he will be sitting when he proceeds to strangle Alex in a few short minutes. Ballard gets into the driver's seat. And drives away. They arrive at Alex Johnson's door. Ballard waits in the car. Taylor goes to the door. I'm not going to play Elisa's video again. You've heard it. You just saw a part of it, and you know what she says. We'd been on the phone for about an hour and a half. We were just talking. He had come home from work. He was baking brownies and cookies for friends because he enjoys baking. He was going to give them his Christmas presents. There was a knock on the door. I could hear Alex get up and walk to the door. He told me that Mark was here, that he was leaving, and that he would talk to her later. And that was the last time anyone spoke to Alex Johnson. Alex went down into the car. Ballard was in the driver's seat. Taylor got into the back seat behind Alex. Alex got in the front seat, passenger side. And the car took off, and almost immediately, Robert Markham Taylor put his arm around Alex, began to assault him, tried to pull him into the back seat. This is when Sarah Connor, a woman who just happened to be on Kramer that night, there visiting a friend, had walked out to the car to get something that her friend's daughter had left in Sarah's car. When she heard blood-curdling screams, she looked up from her car. She was on one side of the car. She looked up and looked through the windshield to see this car stop near the intersection of Kramer and Hanover and saw what was happening in the car. And do you remember what she told us? She told us that there was a guy in the driver's seat. He was big. He was wearing a ball cap. And I asked her, what was he doing? And she said, he wasn't doing anything. Not anything worth noting. That was Ballard in the driver's seat doing nothing, just as he told you. And what was going on with the other guys? I asked her. The fight. There was a fight on. What could you see was happening? Well, it looked like the guy in the back seat was restraining the guy in the front seat. He was trying to get out. Were punches being thrown? Yes. By who? By the guy in the back seat. Who's the guy in the back seat? Who just got in the back of his Mercedes, driven by his employee, Timothy Ballard, and went over to Hanover Avenue to Alex's apartment? It was Robert Markham Taylor.
Could you tell anything about the size of the men in the car?
The only thing that I can really tell you about the size is the guy that was driving was a big guy.
He was a big guy.
Or the person in the driver's seat was a big guy.
And why do you say that?
He just took up a lot of room up there.
Filled the space.
Yeah.
Could you tell if he was wearing anything on his head?
He was just wearing a hat, baseball hat.
A baseball cap. Could you tell anything about the color of the hat?
At the time I could. I think I told somebody at one point, I don't remember now. But I know he had a hat on.
And if you had previously told the investigator who talked to you about this, it was red and black. Do you recall that?
Yeah, I mean, I recall telling him what color it was. I just,
Time has passed. Could you tell anything about the size? Was the driver doing anything?
I don't recall. I mean, nothing that stood out, I don't think.
But what did you see happening between the other two?
Like, fighting.
Did you see arms and legs?
I could see arms,
And what did you see those arms doing?
lots of movement.
In what way? Show me.
I mean, it looked like one person was trying to get away and one person was trying to restrain them.
Okay.
I mean, I can't tell you exactly what every movement was. It was,
Did you see any punches being thrown?
it looked like punches being thrown.
And who was throwing the punches? Where was that person in the car?
It looked like in the back seat.
What she saw is exactly what Timothy Ballard described to you. This defendant assaulting Alex in the front seat of the car. Alex trying to get out of the front seat of the car. And Ballard doing nothing but sitting in the driver's seat. Now, she goes inside to get her phone so she can call 911. And the car moves. And this time the car moves down to the intersection of Aurora and Hanover. And at the intersection of Aurora and Hanover, Ballard gets out of the car because the fight in the back seat has now spilled out into the road, and he walks around and he puts Alex back into the car. And the defendant, Mark Taylor, comes around and gets into the driver's seat. And we know that's exactly what happened because when they pull into the lot at Spare Parts, who gets out of the driver's seat but Mark Taylor?
Oh my gosh, Kramer. And when I went out to my car, they sat there for a minute. I heard somebody scream. I thought they were joking. Well, then the car looked, somebody was trying to get out of the car, and they stopped the car. And then I guess when they saw me, they took off. And then there was another guy on a bike that I think is calling you out at the same time too. And he was like, they're not kidding, it's an emergency, you need to call. I guess he's on the phone, but I don't know where they went, but I hope to God they find them because they're going to beat that kid to death.
Okay. All right. So did you check to see anybody in the car?
I'm sorry?
Did you see the people in the car?
No. I mean, I know it was a guy driving, but I didn't see him
Okay.
good enough to give a description.
What's your phone number again?
It's 859-312-5213, and the guy on the bike kind of took off like they were going, if he's calling, maybe he can tell you guys where
Okay.
they went.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
The guy on the bike did call. You heard his 911 call. The guy on the bike did help because he saw which direction the vehicle moved. He saw that something fell out of the car. It was Alex's shoe. He picked it up and tossed it into the bushes so that later it could be recovered. And the police went back out there with that man and found Alex's shoe there in the snow, exactly where Mr. Gayhart had tossed it. Now they're going down Hanover, making a turn and getting over to National Avenue, which is that road just runs adjacent to Winchester Road. Mark Taylor is driving. He drives back down National Avenue to a remote, dark area. Unbeknownst to him, there are surveillance videos back there. The driver door opens. The defendant, Taylor, gets out of the vehicle. He opens the back seat door and proceeds to viciously and brutally assault Alex. The interior lights of the Mercedes are on, and you can see exactly what is happening. You see his silhouette. You see his arm go up and down and up and down. And we know from the autopsy that he is striking Alex in the head because of the 20+ injuries Alex has all over his head. At this time, Ballard is in the back seat. You see Ballard get out of the car, out of the passenger side back seat, walk around to the front and get in the driver's seat. Taylor moves to the far side of the vehicle. Now we can't see Alex on the ground, but he continues to assault him. Clearly, Alex is on the ground outside of the vehicle because the video shows Taylor on that side again, moving up and down. Ballard's in the car. Ballard gets out, walks over with Taylor, and together they put the near dead body of Alex Johnson back in the back seat. Now, in this trial, this defendant gave you his version of what was happening there. And I asked him on cross-examination, my very first questions were, you've had over 2 years to watch videos, to listen to witnesses' statements, to read police memorandums, to review the autopsy, and to conform what you have to say to what the evidence is in this case. And that is exactly what he has done. He has given you a version that is absolutely unbelievable. That when he was a kid, he was trained in CPR because he was a lifeguard. That when this began to happen, that's him, yes, leaning in the back seat, but he's hitting Timothy Ballard to get Ballard off of Taylor. And that when he goes to the far side of the car, he's not assaulting Alex at all. He's giving him CPR to try and save him. Unbelievable. And it's especially unbelievable when you consider what all the other witnesses have to say about what happened before that and what happened after that. And when you think about everything that this defendant did in preparation to kill Alex and what he did after he killed Alex, it makes what he has to say about what happened that evening completely unbelievable. It makes it a lie. Now, we're going to watch this video one more time. I wish you had a laptop in front of you so that you could watch it small, because you're not in a good spot to see this video, I know, and neither are you. But this is what we have, right? This time, I'm going to show it to you, regular size, and then a smaller, closer up version. Do the best you can in watching this thing. This is what we have, but it's unbelievable that we even have this. How often do we have a video of a murder? Because it's exactly what we have in this case. Whoops. Can we get some napkins, a napkin? Turn down all the lights, please. Okay, remember how this starts. They pull into the frame and you can see the car moving, you can see the back door open, you can see people hanging out of the back passenger door. See, the back passenger door is open there. The back passenger door is open there. And Taylor pulls into the very back, darkest part of this lot. He can't go any further at this point. and he backs in. That is Mark Taylor leaning in. And as best you can, I want you to watch the movement here between the light and the dark. "24 times his arm raises and lowers on Alex. He gets back into the driver's seat. I don't know why. Gets back out, goes back into the back seat. Now Timothy Ballard walks around and gets into the driver's seat. And you can see on the far side of the vehicle the arm still going up and down. Ballard opening the back seat and helping Taylor pull Alex's body back into the vehicle. And they returned to the garage on Queen Street. Now, Taylor has an explanation for what happened. Told you that he was trying to get Ballard off of Alex, that he was performing CPR, and then he gives you some other explanations, which really have no reality in them. He tries to say that Alex was in the back seat. How he got there, he gives no explanation, and that Alex was seat belted, and that he had to come around and undo the seat belt in order to pull him out and give him CPR, when we know that is not true. Taylor claims that Ballard was assaulting Alex with a club. And we've heard talk about that, even during Ms. Down's closing argument, that the injuries that Alex had were from a club. That's not what Dr. Frame said. You heard the description of this club or this slapstick, whatever it is, a baton, that the end of it was like a little nub or round on the end. What did Dr. Frame tell us about the injuries that Alex had to his head? These were injuries that were so deep that they penetrated his scalp, that they penetrated his skull, that they went through the tough covering of the brain called the dura mater, that they embedded skull into the brain and down into the sinus area. A little nub doesn't do that. That's not how that happens. It happens with an instrument that was described by Timothy Ballard. He said it looked like an ice pick, but it wasn't sharp on the end. We don't have the instrument. The police found that. Could it be the instrument? Perhaps. But according to Ballard, it was tossed into the barrel along with Alex. Was it in the barrel when it was pulled from the river? No, it wasn't. But then neither was Alex's phone. And we know Alex's phone was in the barrel because when Detective Wilson on Christmas Day came in and began working on this case, one of the very first things he did was contact the cell phone provider of Alex's phone to find out if the phone was active or not. And the last active thing related to cell towers on Alex's phone was the phone pinging off of the cell tower at the Kentucky River at Interstate 75 and Exit 99. So we know Alex's phone was in that barrel, and it wasn't there when it was pulled out of the river. And if the phone isn't there, it stands to reason that the weapon isn't there either. Now, did Timothy Ballard give different descriptions of this thing? No, he didn't. He gave the same description every time. Other people gave names to this thing. Not Ballard. He just described it as a long pointed metal object. The police gave him possible descriptions, maybe a thing that you use to open oysters, maybe an ice pick. Descriptions, names were given to it, but Timothy Ballard never changed what description he gave to it. And the thing is, it wasn't a club. Because as Dr. Frame said, the depressions in Alex's skull were caused by a thing that was small, not broad. A broader thing, like a club, would have caused a different type of fracture, a linear fracture. That's not the kind of injuries that Alex had in his skull. And you will recall from the trust video, when we try to determine whether or not Taylor is telling you the truth, he had no injuries to his hands. He says he was in there trying to protect Alex, that he had injuries to his hand. He has no injuries to his hand. You can clearly see his hands in the video. Now, when they get back to the garage, Ballard drives the Mercedes. The Mercedes pulls up to the third bay. The defendant, Mark Taylor, jumps out in his dark clothing, runs in, and opens the third bay door. Ballard pulls the Mercedes inside. Surely Mark Taylor's hands were bloody from having just killed Alex. And there was blood on the garage door handle. Police put some reagent on it. It glowed in the dark. They collected a swab. That swab was sent to the crime lab. It was tested presumptively to be blood. It was DNA tested, and it came back consistent with the blood of Alex Johnson. You remember what Megan Duff's
Objection, Your
testimony?
Honor. May we approach?
Yes, ma'am.
Remember what Megan Duff said about it when questioned on cross-examination about unable to exclude Alex Johnson as a contributor to that DNA? Her response was, unable to exclude is the same as include.
So based upon that, there's no way for you to say that you couldn't exclude Mr. Johnson, correct?
That is correct.
But you also can't include him.
Cannot exclude and can include are synonymous.
Synonymous, the same thing. We can't exclude him as a contributor. That's the same thing as saying as we can include him as a contributor. Numbers were given to that, but when you think about all the other evidence in this case and what just happened, you know beyond a reasonable doubt that that's Alex Johnson's blood on that door handle, and you know who put it there. The defendant, Mark Taylor. Once inside the garage, Ballard and Taylor moved Alex's body into the barrel. That barrel. But not before they took the keys. And after putting the body in the barrel, they took the bungee cords that were there in Taylor's garage, tied the top down. Ballard says he thinks Taylor dropped the weapon into the barrel. They put it on the back of the back of the truck, and Ballard drove it to the river and dumped it in. That truck left the garage at 9:24 p.m. on the evening of December 20th. Ballard drove it down to the river and returned with an empty bedded truck. While Ballard was gone, Mark Taylor was there in the shop cleaning up, wiping out the back of the Mercedes, removing Alex's blood, in other words, removing evidence of the crime. Then the two left again in the truck. Ballard drove out first in the truck, followed by Taylor, who at this point had removed his coat. And if you look closely from the video, it looks like he has also removed his slacks. Here he is running in. You can see he has a white shirt now, and he's not wearing dark pants any longer. Because he was the one in the back seat assaulting Alex. He's the one covered in blood. They go back to the apartment. They change clothes, but not before going back to Alex's. To get money, to get marijuana. And then to go out to trust a party. "33 days later, Taylor would be arrested in Pharr, Texas, just north of our border with Mexico, with marijuana, cash, guns, and clothing. But that night, right after he killed Alex, he wasn't running just yet. There was no reason to run. He hadn't been caught. He was ready to party. And at 11:40, he went into trust to do just that. This trust video is one of those things that paints 1,000 words. I want you to watch Timothy Ballard during this video. He is quiet. He is reserved. He has nothing to say. And watch Mark Taylor. He's excited. He's upbeat. He's like the quarterback that just won the big game. He's dancing. He's moving around. He is feeling good. Now, you know, he has an explanation for this. His explanation is that he wasn't dancing. He was high, and this is just an involuntary reaction to the music. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a man who is stimulated by what has just happened. He is feeling good. He's got a handful of cash. He's got a garage full of marijuana. He is now not just a major marijuana dealer in Lexington. He is the marijuana dealer in Lexington. He tells you that he was so impaired he didn't know what he was doing at this point. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's standing waiting to be admitted into the club. He is waiting to have his wristband put on him so he can go into the club. He is making arrangements to have a bottle brought over to the area where he's going to be sitting so that he can be served. He's out to party and have a good time. They walk back to the couch area, and you've seen this video. You know what happens next. Timothy Ballard sits down and does nothing. He just sits there. Mark Taylor greets friends, walks around, goes talks to the DJ. This is the guy that's scared to death of a guy that's sitting there with a club in his pocket. This is a guy who just minutes earlier saw his best friend killed by someone else. This is a guy who tried to save him by performing CPR on him. That's not this guy. This is the killer. This is Mark Taylor after killing Alex, out to have a good time. And in a few minutes in this video, Mark Taylor walks back over, sits down next to Timothy Ballard, beside him, and pulls money out of his pocket and starts counting it. Now he sits down. This is the second half of that video, and I've overlapped them just a little bit because this is where Taylor then sits down and begins to count his money. pulled his money out of his pocket. It's all back together. He puts it back in his pocket. And then he goes off to have a good time. And I'm not going to play this entire thing for you, but I'm going to pull the bar a few times so that you can see that all through the rest of this video, Timothy Ballard's sitting there by himself. Taylor, who claims he was so afraid of this guy, is nowhere in sight. Could have called the police, could have run away, could have just simply left Ballard there. They were there in his car, in Taylor's car. But Ballard just sits there. Until apparently Taylor called him to come and leave so that he could be driven home. Part of the defense has been, why would Mark Taylor kill Alex Johnson when the business was going to be his anyway? Okay. Well, as I said, we don't have to prove motive, but the thing is, Alex may have told Lisa that he was getting out of the business. He may have told Casey he was getting out of the business. And I hope that was true. I really do, for his sake. But he wouldn't be the first person to tell someone that he loved something that wasn't actually true, because that's what they wanted to hear. They wanted to hear that he was giving this up, because not only is it against the law, it's dangerous. You see where it got him? It's quite possible that Alex was not getting out of the business. And now Taylor knew this. And Taylor had been with Alex to North Carolina. And he knew who the primary supplier of all this marijuana was. He'd met the supplier. And with Alex gone, he would be the man. He would have the connection to the supplier in North Carolina. He would be the marijuana dealer in Lexington. You see, this wasn't just about 20 pounds of marijuana and $38,000 on the night of January 20th. This was about 20 pounds of marijuana every week, or every 2 weeks, or every 3 weeks. And about a lot of money over a long period of time. That's what this was about. Now, after the murder, he worked very hard to cover up what he had done. He hired Brandon Roberts, a guy that had been cleaning his apartment, to come and clean his garage on Christmas Eve, because there was going to be an inspection. Taylor gave Roberts very specific instructions: clean between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning and be out by 4 o'clock a.m. Be sure and focus on the handles and the locks of bays 2 and 3. Why? Because that's where the blood was. And Brandon Roberts did as he was asked. He came over, he cleaned with bleach, washed it all up. And Taylor has an explanation for it, doesn't he? He's got an explanation for why he had the barrel. He's got an explanation for why Ballard had the truck. He's got an explanation for what happened there in the spare parts lot. And now he's got an explanation for asking a friend to clean his garage on Christmas Eve at 3 o'clock in the morning, because there's going to be an inspection. And his testimony was, but the inspection had something to do with the guy that also shared the garage, because a plumber was coming. Now that's exactly the kind of thing you could put a witness on to corroborate. You could bring Stewart in here to say.
Objection.
Approach, please.
An inspection on Christmas Eve? How ridiculous is that? There was no inspection. He wanted that garage cleaned up. He wanted the blood gone. If he hadn't gotten it all himself, he wanted to make sure that Brandon did. Roberts did what he was hired to do. But when he saw Taylor on the news, when the warrant was out for Taylor on the news, after Ballard had been arrested, Taylor got a phone call from Brandon Roberts. And Brandon Roberts asked him what the F is going on. And what was Taylor's response? It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Now, Roberts didn't want to say that here in trial. He didn't want to say it in front of his friend Mark Taylor. But he told the police, and Officer McGowan came back in to tell you precisely what Brandon Roberts had said 2 years earlier when questioned about this.
Did you all ask if he had any contact with Mr. Taylor?
We did.
And did he say that the day that the states appeared on the news, he contacted Mr. Taylor and said, what the fuck's going on? And Mr. Taylor said, I'm sorry, it wasn't supposed to go down like that, I'm sorry.
That's correct.
And Mr. Roberts said that happened on the day that Mr. Taylor's picture appeared on the news.
That's correct.
Okay.
So not only did he have the garage cleaned up afterwards, he got rid of the Mercedes. After the murder, he sold his Mercedes to Luis Rodriguez. Luis Rodriguez is the man that he refers to in his phone contacts as the Hispanic mechanic. According to Luis, the Mercedes was in bad shape when he got it. The mirrors were broken. It was covered in spray paint on the outside. The headlights were broken. The transmission was messed up. There was no seats in the back of the Mercedes, and it smelled like bleach. Taylor had done all of this to his own car, so the thing would have to be junked. He had no option but to have it junked. He knew that Luis, if it wasn't completely trashed, would want to fix it and keep it and maybe sell it himself, and Taylor couldn't let that happen. That's why he wouldn't let Luis hold on to it, because the police might come, the police might start inquiring, the police might get evidence out of the back, Alex Johnson's blood would be in the back of his Mercedes. They had to go.
Tell me about the Mercedes when you got it from Mr. Taylor. What was the condition of the car?
The condition was, I think the transmission that wasn't work, the mirrors was broke, and they had paint all over the car. Like somebody did it purpose, I don't know.
Tell me about the Mercedes. Were the seats still in the car?
No.
No? Did the car smell like anything?
Yeah, it smelled like bleach.
And you remember what Luis said when he asked Taylor about what had happened to the car? He said, you don't want to know.
And did you ask Mr. Taylor about the condition of the car?
No, I just asked him if when he told me to buy it to junk it, I said, can I fix it? He said, no, because I don't have the title. So, and I asked him what happened, and he just told me, you don't want to know. So I don't ask no more questions there.
Luis knew he didn't need to ask, wasn't going to ask any more questions of his employer, Mr. Taylor. You don't want to know. So Luis did what he was asked to do. He took the defendant's Mercedes to Baker's Iron and Metal, and he had it junked. Now, of course, Mr. Taylor has an explanation for this too. The explanation is he lives in a crummy part of town. He left his Mercedes that he just happened to have someone killed in the back seat of, outside of his house after the murder, that someone came along and trashed the thing, that he didn't call the police, and that he was willing to let go of this Mercedes, whatever the value of it may have been. It was certainly more than $100. And that's what he sold it to Luis for. And then finally, when we look at the things that he did after he killed Alex Johnson, perhaps the most offensive of all of the things are the text messages that he sent to Alex Johnson after he killed him. On December 20th at 9:30 p.m., Mark Taylor sent a text message to Alex Johnson's phone. This is the man he had just killed, put into the barrel. And the message was, cleaning up and headed to Trust. Let me know if you need a ride. Now we know only Mark Taylor could have sent this text message because at this point, Timothy Ballard is in the truck driving the barrel down to the river. Then he sent a second text message to Alex Johnson's phone at 12:56. That's the 20th going into the 21st. And that text message said, "Vamos, bro." And then a third message on the morning of December 21st at 5:45 a.m. that said, "Early Monday." Plus Taylor called Alex Johnson's phone on the 21st, the 22nd, and the 23rd. Those text messages are not grieving. Those phone calls are not grieving. Those things are designed for no other purpose than to cover up what he had done and to make it look like he, Robert Markham Taylor, was also trying to find Alex Lewis. That he had no idea that Alex wasn't there, that he was actually going to go pick him up and take him to Trust after he was already dead. And oddly enough, during the cross-examination, when he had an explanation for the barrel and the truck and the Mercedes and the cleaning of the garage, he had no explanation for why he would be texting and calling a dead man. His attorney offered you one during her closing, but he had no explanation. All of these actions that I have listed for you are evidence of guilt. That's why they're so important. That's why it's so important to play the testimony of each of these witnesses. They are all acts that are inconsistent with innocence. All right, now, let's talk about the witnesses that he brought in, the ones that said Ballard admitted to doing this. A parade of convicted felons. First one was convicted felon and state inmate Frederick Miller, who, according to jail records, was in a cell for a single day, one day, with Timothy Ballard.
Objection.
One day. And one day, Timothy Ballard confesses to him he committed a murder. He's in a cell with the defendant, Robert Markham Taylor, for 5 months. And for the first time last week, he talked to somebody about this. That's what he told you. For the first time last week, he talked to somebody about this, after this trial had started. Then we heard from convicted felon and state inmate Brian Scott Kirk, again, who only talked to the defense last week, after the trial had begun, and claimed that he had teased Ballard and said, "You're no killer," and Ballard corrected him and said, "Yeah, I'm a killer." Although Kirk didn't tell anyone about this until after the trial had begun. And then finally, convicted felon and state inmate Brian Shane Sturgill, who said he was in G-Pod with Ballard, and Ballard told him he'd killed this guy with a steel object and had thrown it into the river. And on cross-examination, Ms. Williams asked him, because he said, I was in G-Pod with him when this happened. Would it surprise you to know that Mr. Ballard was never in G-Pod? And at that point, Mr. Sturgill began to backpedal, to offer some other explanation for where he might have been when he had this conversation, this alleged conversation with Mr. Ballard. But whatever it was, we know that this guy, Mr. Sturgill, was in a cell for a longer, much longer period of time with the defendant, Robert Markham Taylor. Now, you ask yourself, what would they have to gain by coming in here and saying this stuff if it wasn't true? Well, who wouldn't want to help someone like Robert Markham Taylor? Because if he can convince you that he's not guilty, he walks. He's back out there. You don't teach old dogs new tricks. He's back out there moving pot again. And don't you think Mr. Miller, Mr. Kirk, and Mr. Sturgill are going to come calling for what's due to them, for what they did for him in this trial? There's motive. There's reason to come in here and say that kind of stuff, especially when you consider the circumstances under which it came out and when it came out. The defense says that Ballard told somebody he was a good liar and that he's come in here and lied to you because he says he's a good liar. Apparently he's not as good a liar as he thinks he is, because he was talking to the police on December 26th, on January 13th, and on January 20th, run sonar into the river. But finally on that day, because the water had gone down, detectives were able to get up on the bridge and look down and see the barrel. The divers went into the water. They wrapped an orange body bag around the barrel, attached it to the crane, pulled it up on the bank of the river, and finally, the body of Alex Johnson was found. And this is what he looked like. 6 foot tall, 160 pounds, folded up and pushed into that barrel. Still dressed, wearing one shoe because the other had fallen out as he was being taken back to the parking lot to be beaten. No cell phone, no keys, and his head showing blunt force trauma. The puncture wound to the central part of his head. Nine cuts or lacerations to the left side of his head. Ten cuts or lacerations to the back side of his head. Lacerations to the right side of his head. All injuries that, according to Dr. Frame, matched or consistent with the instrument that Timothy Ballard has described to you. In all, 26 different injuries, each distinct, each caused by an action of this instrument being inserted, shoved, pushed into Alex's head. Internally, he had bleeding to the strap muscles of his neck, a fracture to his spinal column, consistent with being grabbed from behind by the defendant in the car, exactly what Sarah Connor saw, 4 rib fractures, a depressed skull fracture, bone pushed through the skull, through the brain, and into the sinus area. On the left side of the skull, 3 round defects. Again, pushed and depressed. Not linear fractures, but pushed and depressed. Bone below in his brain. Consistent with an instrument that Timothy Ballard described the defendant using that night. These injuries would have caused Alex's brain to swell. The swelling could not be contained within the skull. So the pressure built up. And pretty soon Alex couldn't breathe because his brain couldn't function. And if you can't breathe, it's like suffocating. We know he had to have been afraid. We know Sarah Connor heard blood-curdling screams from that car. We know he was fighting to get out of that car. We don't know when he died, whether it was in the parking lot or on the way back. God forbid he was still alive when he was rolled into the river. But what we do know is how he died was brought about by the actions of Robert Markham Taylor. Robert Markham Taylor did all of this. He had a plan, he set it in motion, and he covered it up. That's what the evidence in this case has been. This case is not about Timothy Bauer. It's about Robert Markham Taylor. And it's about Alex. He kidnapped him, killed him, covered up what he did, and he needs to be held accountable to this community, to Alex's family and friends, to the Commonwealth. So based on all of the evidence that you have heard in this case, the videos, the testimony, the photographs, the defendant's own explanations about what was happening, we ask that you find him guilty, as indicted by the Fayette County Grand Jury, guilty and responsible for tampering with physical evidence, for kidnapping Alex, and for murdering him. Murder